Hey boys and girls, Ken Smith Fishing. This is a video that came from me watching one of Ben Milliken's videos the other day. And he was scoping and he's looking out at a fish, and I don't remember exactly the scenario, but he's looking at a fish out in the distance, and he makes a comment about he missed that fish left or right. And it clicked. So I've done a lot of videos. I do a lot of videos, but I've done some that I think are obviously much better than some other ones. And back in April of 21, I did a really nice two-part video that compared Lowrance Active Target to Garmin LiveScope. I'll put a link to the first of those two videos right there. And in that video, I talked about cone angle, right? That's the screenshot or the thumbnail or whatever you call it for that video. And so I talked a little bit in that video about cone angle and stuff at a distance, looking at stuff at a distance through LiveScope. And then the next video I did was just a few months ago, I think maybe back in July or August of last year. I was over at Jones Marine there in Texarkana getting some electronics on my boat. And Spencer Sheffield, a Major League Fishing pro, really, really good LiveScoper, was there. And struck up a great conversation with him. I'll put a link to that video right there. And that conversation was about why guys were using the LVS 62, which at one point was sort of referred to as the saltwater transducer for LiveScope. I think anymore it's not. It's just considered the big one versus the LVS 34, which is the newest freshwater. Again, not exactly correct, but anyway. So that was a really And generally, what I consider good videos are videos that are interesting to me to learn to do. And from those two videos, you guys know I have a guy who was a follower who's become a friend. His name is Walton. You'll see comments from him. It's Texman, T-X-M-A-N. And Walton's a retired engineer, really, really bright guy, and really good, obviously, with math, being an engineer. So I've leaned on Walton for a number of these videos, and I did for this video again today. Excuse me, I'm working off two screens here. So to understand what I'm going to talk about today, we got to talk a little bit about geometry. So if you think about a circle, it's 360 degrees, right? So 360 degrees around is a circle. And if you take just that little blue slice of the pie, if you would, from basically 11 o'clock to noon, that's 20 degrees of an angle. And that's important because the cone angle on an LVS 34 transducer is a 20 degree cone angle. I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that means. But, well, let's do it now. So the cone angle this way is 20 degrees. This way is 135 degrees, which here is represented by that orange slice. But let's first just take that 20 degree cone angle piece and take a little bit deeper look at what that means. And what I wanted to know, and what Walton helped me do, was I wanted to know on a 20 degree cone angle at distance, how wide or narrow is that beam? So again, being really good with math, he said, well, I can run that calculation for me. And I don't know how he did it. I know it's correct because he showed it to me. But here's what that means. So if the bow of the boat, if your transducer is on the left side of that screen, and you're looking out in front of that boat, for example, let's just use 20 feet. Then at 20 feet, you're seeing a slice of 7 feet of water. So you're only seeing something that's pretty much directly in front of the boat. Still pretty wide, but pretty much directly in front of the boat. But as you go out, that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And you see out there at 100 feet, that's 35 feet wide. So what that says to you is, if at 100 feet there's a fish way over there on the right side, then on the right side of your viewing space, you're not going to be able to tell that that fish is way right or way left or dead in the middle. If you throw your bait out there, it may look like your bait falls directly on top of that fish, but you could have missed that fish by more than 30 feet at 100 feet, which starts to explain to me why fish are so much easier to catch as they get closer, because I'm for almost most all the time getting the bait closer to them. So again, something Ben said about how he missed that fish makes sense to me once I realized this graph. When I get way out there, if I can get a fish in that 40 to 60 feet range, my likelihood of putting that bait in that fish's strike zone, if you will, greatly enhances. And the other thing that will help, excuse me guys, I'm coming out of strep throat. I tested positive for strep throat this week. One of the things that will help me with that is when I get in closer, I know that I'm putting it in the range that that fish will either see it or be willing to move to it to bite it versus being out there at 100 feet. So that's the first thing I thought was kind of important. But again, back to that other one. So if the first cone was the 20 degrees, now that orange one's the 135. Well, that is the other angle, so the cone on a LVS 34 is 20 degrees by 135 degrees. And if that shape looks familiar to you, guess what? That is what you see when you flip that transducer on its side, and now you're shooting in 135 degree cone in perspective view, right? So now this is why having that second transducer is so helpful. When I look out now, realizing that I need to do a quick cutaway here. So this is obviously a perspective view, but the two white lines you see that we've drawn on there, that is what the traditional view would be seeing. So at 50 feet, it would be 17.6 feet wide, and then out there at 100 feet, it'd be 35 feet wide. That will make the rest of this a lot easier to understand, knowing what those two white lines we've drawn on there exactly represent. So you look right there, those two fish in that circle are 50-ish feet from the boat, but if I throw a bait out there, I'm going to miss them. And this is why it was so helpful the other day at Rayburn when I could see the fish on the perspective and the traditional, and I would just turn that trolling motor till I could center them in that center. I could center them in my perspective mode, and I know I'm throwing right at those fish. I can't tell you how important that becomes when you're LiveScope fishing, to be able to know that you're putting that bait, especially as they get more pressured and more finicky, that you're putting it right on top of it as opposed to 3 feet or 10 feet or 20 feet right or left of that fish. The other thing, as I thought through this and kind of talked through this with Walton, was when you flip that cone 20, 135 to now 135, 20, well, guess what? You also now are seeing down more depth at distance than you are up close. So if you think about it, this is now a representation of that 20 degree cone angle turned on its side. So now this shows you looking out into the distance, how far down or up you see that bait. So now you have a pretty good sense of when you use LiveScope, traditional, and perspective view together, you're able to dial in those fish to put them right in the center of your cone. Because now, if you can turn that perspective view where they're right in the middle, you're going to see them on your traditional view as well, but you're going to know they're not 10 feet, 15 feet off to the side. They're right dead exactly where you want to make that bait presentation. So again, I thought this was just, as I thought through this was so interesting to me. Those first 2 or 3 videos that I referenced earlier are really good videos. If you haven't seen those videos, personally, I think that's some of my better work on LiveScope for sure. I know, I'm pretty well known for my boat videos, but that's some of my best technical LiveScope video stuff. But I think this one really, if you just think about this chart, it makes so much sense. And we talked about this at Rayburn the other day, the patience of LiveScope fishing. I'll tell an interesting story. So Moon Pie, Steve Evans, was running a camera boat in, must have been a Major League Fishing event 4 or 5 years ago. And they went out and they followed Dakota. And Dakota was tracking a giant fish. But Dakota would not throw at that fish. I think it was a 9-pounder that he eventually caught. But Moon Pie was kind of blown away that he wouldn't just fire on that fish every chance he got. He kept waiting to get that fish where he knew how that fish was set up, that he felt like he could make the proper presentation. He didn't want to spook that fish. that makes a lot of sense to me now. If I've got a fish out there at 80 or 90 or 100 feet, why waste the effort of or the possibility of spooking that fish by making a bad cast? Let that fish get in that range where I know I'm going to be a lot closer and a lot more accurate with that fish, and use my perspective view to make sure I make the best possible presentation the first time that fish sees my bait. I don't want to condition that fish to my bait on 3 or 4 or 5 casts. So going through this process and thinking through some of my fishing in the past, I got to be more patient with this. I keep saying this. It is so much like nest fishing, right? You wait till you get that fish positioned where you know you can piss him off, and you can either bonk it him in the head or drop it right in front of his nose when he's turned the right way. You know, you don't want him turned with his back to you. You want to be able to pull that bait right in his face. Exact same stuff, guys. I realized in edit I wanted to talk about this as well. So remember, you've got a 135-degree cone angle up to down, if you will, when you're in traditional mode, and that's why you see what you see here. Now, if it was just I guess a 90 degree, so 1/4 of the view, you would see straight down below the boat to top of the water line, right? So 1/4 of the pie chart. But instead, what they've done is they've given you the ability to see back under the boat, which is represented by that line that starts at 0 and goes back to 20 or 25 feet under the boat, and then to look out in front of the boat. And this also takes us back to a conversation we had with Taylor from Jones Marine early in one of our videos, where he would actually take, and on mine, he has clicked my my view up a little bit. So I'm actually losing a little bit of under the boat, but what it's allowing me to do is see the water line out in front of the boat, so I can actually see a topwater bait, or I can see more specific, and you can walk a bait or throw a buzz bait and you'll see it reacting to the top of the water. But what it also helps you to do is see a bait splash down way out there in the front, and that the bubbles when it splashes makes it easier to pick up where that bait is, so you can start tracking a swim bait or a little minnow really fast. So just for a note, I'm recording this. Camera shut off, sorry. I'm recording this 1st of February. If you want you some Ken Smith fishing money to spend, Jeff and I are coming to fish the Texas Team Trail in Rayburn this weekend, and I haven't been there in several weeks. So we're going to fish Friday, but it's highly likely we're donating. So please feel free to come and take our money. We'll be in my boat, Black Bass Cat with a white stripe. If you see us Saturday morning getting ready for the takeoff, or see us at the weigh-in, please come say hello. So thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll have more video up for you from the Taos trip, from obviously fishing the Texas Team Trail at Rayburn, and some other interesting stuff we got coming from the guys at Jones Marine Electronics, and next big thing in the next few weeks. Thanks for tuning in, guys.